Hi, everybody, and welcome to this live stream where I'm thrilled to introduce you to Arzelle. And we are going to be chatting about sewing with confidence and giving you some pro tips for seamless beginnings. So, Arzelle, maybe you might like to share what actually inspired your passion for sewing and sustainable fashion.
Hi, Nicola. Thank you so much for having me here. Well, I think my inspiration for sewing, my love for sewing actually happened at a very, very young age, about 4 or 5. I used to see my mother sewing. She had all these scrap fabrics, and I would used to take them and sew them onto my dolls. And that grew into a passion for designing. And then I actually went into fashion design, studying it, getting my degree, and I ended up designing and lecturing. So at that point, I started designing for people, wedding dresses, Latin ballroom, all types of things like that. But something always a little bit nagged me a bit. It was always waist cut off. And when I went into doing a ready to wear collection, within the manufacturing production line, there was so much waste, and it always kind of bugged me a little bit like, what's going on here? Why is there so much waste? What's happening? Even in the type of quality of fabric. So it's always been something that was there, but I can't say that I really paid too much attention to it then. This is maybe about 15, 20 years ago. But as it progressed and things within the industry, like in 2014 with the Plaza factory that actually collapsed, things came to light and ethical fashion and sustainable fashion became more of a norm. And also within research studies that I did myself, I became more aware of what is actually happening and what is sustainable, what is eco, what do those words really mean? So that got me into thinking about my own approach. How do I, address patterns? How do I choose fabric? And then how can I actually then help people? So normally before when I was used to lecture, that was something I would do there. But now I am trying to convey it to a more broader community.
That's really fabulous because as an eco printer and felt maker, wherever possible, I try and use the most sustainable methods, and I'm passionate about sharing them with other people.
Mm.
And it isn't until several years ago that I started sewing, but I honestly believe if I had discovered you beforehand, I might have started sewing sooner, because you really specialize now, particularly in helping new people get going and people sew with confidence, and then from the sustainability perspective, no waste. But you also obviously have all that experience as a designer and with people with more experience. And I know we are going to get questions. So if people have questions for Arzelle, I will invite them later during the conversation. And I would ask you to put a question mark or several question marks in front and behind so that I can identify them to ask them to Arzelle. But we have actually had quite a number of questions have come in already. So our conversation today is really going to follow a little bit of one thing will follow the other, and it will include answers to many of the questions that came in beforehand. So Arzelle, one thing that people can get very stressed about is what sort of tools and equipment do they need to get going? Now, we are talking about machine sewing as opposed to hand stitching. And I have an image here of some of the tools that you would consider essential. I mean, it may not be that people need every one, but maybe you'd like to talk us through these first.
Yes, definitely. So, of course, if you're starting sewing, you need a sewing machine. You don't need to go for a very expensive machine. If you have one already that you maybe have from before, you can use that. But you can have your tools that you need to have is you need something to mark with. So marking tools can be from the pencils that you actually, your chalk pencils, your tailored chalk. Even some people tend to use the friction pen. So things that you already have, you can even use. Though we know we don't recommend those because they can sometimes leave stains, but tailored chalk is good. Something small like embroidery scissor that you might have, or nippers, good quality pins. So for me, it goes more about the quality that you actually have than the quantity of tools. So good quality pins, good quality machine needles, and good quality hand sewing needles. A dedicated fabric scissors. So your fabric scissors is just for fabric. They are for nothing else. We don't use them for anything else. You do not touch paper with them. And of course, paper scissors. And then you need something to measure with. So that can be a measuring tape, and you can always have like a little seam gauge that you can use. And another important one would be an unpicker, because with sewing, everybody, even me, we all make mistakes. We do unpick. I unpick often still, so definitely that. And then one other thing that I always add in is a press cloth. So a press cloth is a piece of cotton. I use cotton voile just because it protects your fabric. So I always tell people your iron, maybe you don't have the best quality iron, or the settings might not be that great anymore, but a press cloth can actually save your fabric. And lastly, good quality thread. So avoid cheap thread. Cheap thread might be old. The way that it's been spun together might not be the best. So a good quality thread can make the difference in a garment. It will also stop from breaking the whole time.
And I find it really interesting just listening to the tools that you use. When you say about good quality thread, something that I would like to add for people who are eco printers or natural dyers like me would be consider using silk rather than polyester thread for a lot of your sewing, because if you are sewing garments or intending to dye them afterwards, the silk will actually absorb the color and polyester doesn't. So something as simple as that. The thread may be more expensive, but it is definitely worth using it. And
Absolutely.
There's a very, very exciting new product for people who are really passionate about this, because Marion of Beautiful Silks in Australia, she has actually just added cones of silk that are suitable for your serger. So I was really amazed with that. They are expensive, but that would mean the inside of your garment would be as beautiful as the outside.
It's a quality.
Exactly. And although I personally work with my hands all the time, I'm quite awkward with things. So I don't use pins anymore. I actually always use wonder clips or those little clips, and I find them
They're
fantastic.
also great. Yeah. They're also great. Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the sewing machine and needles in a minute. Fabric is also really, really, really important. And how would you recommend somebody chooses the correct fabric for a project? And, are there any fabrics that you would avoid as a beginner?
Oh, definitely. Choosing fabric is quite interesting, because when we walk into a fabric shop, it's like, it's fabric everywhere and it's just amazing. We just want to grab and buy everything. And that's normally where the issue comes in. If you don't understand your fabric and you don't quite understand what level, you need to be at to use it. So I always tell people, look at where your level is, and then look at it. Cotton, any cotton fiber. But cotton, again, is different, because you can get a woven fabric. Remember, cotton, the word it's basically what it's made out of. So cotton, the word itself doesn't mean much. You need to look at your fabrics like chambray or quilter's cotton or broadcloth. There's so many different ones. Lawn, poplin if you're making shirts. So cotton, you need to look at what type of fabric matches your skill level, which is normally a cotton type of fiber. And what I said now, you got your wovens, but you will also have cotton that is jersey. Avoid jersey, because jersey is stretchy and it can actually struggle to sew. You need a little bit of different techniques and things to do with that. Fabrics to avoid, and these are normally the very pretty ones that we always want to go to. So they might be your satins, your chiffons, brocades, or like a thicker tweed, the ones that will fray a lot, lame, velvet, because these all require very special techniques or special equipment even to sew them. And even when you're cutting out like velvet, there's a very specific way to cut it out, a specific way to sew it, and even to iron and press it. So if you buy that and you start making a project and you iron velvet wrong or you cut it out wrong, you're going to end up with an awkward looking garment and you're going to be like, what did I do wrong? Meanwhile, you didn't do anything wrong in your sewing process, but there was maybe little steps that you left out or little things that you didn't know about the direction of the fabric or how to actually press it correctly. So definitely a good fabric to start with is woven cottons. You can even go into linens, although linens do tend to fray a little bit more, but your basic woven cottons, depending on your project that you're doing, the weight that you will choose for that. So yeah.
Well, I'm very excited to say that Arzelle has the most amazing guide. Arzelle, how many different types of fabric are in your free guide?
Oh, I think it's over 60 that I listed in there, and I listed them in like what type of project you are making, and you can like follow through, and then it lists medium weight, lightweight, heavier weight, so you can actually go and see and choose from various fabrics within that specific column. And I also listed them into beginners, intermediate, and a bit more advanced.
Whoa, thank you so much. So Arzelle is very kindly going to email this free fabric guide to anybody who clicks the link in the video description after this live stream has ended. I need to upload that video description, and many people will be watching this as a recording. So check the video description afterwards, and you can register for Arzelle's newsletter and get that amazing fabric buying guide. So thank you very much for offering that, Arzelle. That's brilliant.
Welcome. If it can help anybody not be overwhelmed in a shop, there you go. Fantastic.
Okay, so we now we know our essential tools, and we have an idea of what fabric we're using. And so then the next thing might be a sewing machine. And I've got an image here of yours, and this looks a lot more complicated than mine. It's got all the bells and whistles. So maybe you might like to chat a little bit about sewing machines, which ones to buy, you know, new, secondhand, expensive, how to just get going as well on a budget.
Okay, so this machine is actually 15 years old, believe it or not. There's a lot more new ones, more advanced ones that are out at this moment. But just some of my tips when you're starting, you might already have a machine or somebody gifted you a machine. Your machine, you need to make sure that it has certain requirements. I always say when you start off, you want to have a straight stitch, you want to have a zigzag, you want to have a buttonhole. So because you might want to make shirts or skirts where you'll actually have buttonholes, and you might even want like an overlock or an overcast type of stitch into it. So I would say those will be the generic stitches you have. So don't get overwhelmed when you're looking at machines and they have like 100, 200 or how many ever stitches. A lot of them are decorative stitches, but if you concentrate on those, your straight, your zigzag, buttonhole, and then maybe your overcast, your overlock stitch, that is good. You can also, I would say, a blind hem stitch, because that is nice to use for when you're doing hems. When you're looking at buying a machine new, I don't recommend just buying off online. I actually recommend going into the shop, going into the store and testing the different machines. Machines have different ways of sewing, they have different speed. So you need to sit behind a machine, you need to feel how it feels with you in front of it. How does it handle? How does it actually move? So definitely go and test drive machines to see which one works better. Those would be the two main things I would say what you need to look out for. Don't look at all the bells and whistles. Make sure that it's something that matches to your way of sewing. So go and test them out. And another last recommendation, try to use brands that are well known. The reason for that is if your machine has to go in for a service or it needs to get a new part, those brands have been around for quite some time. So you would be able to get their parts or a service department much easier than maybe a brand that is new or maybe that doesn't have within your area. So even look within your area, what is type of, the shops that actually, who has what is popular in that area.
Those are great tips. Thank you. And in fact, because I really my mother sewed all our clothes when we were children, but I have been absolutely appalling on a sewing machine for so many years until I really took it up recently. And that's exactly what I did. I knew that at the time, all I wanted to do was sew felt. And this is pre-eco printing. I wanted to do some work for an exhibition, and I wanted to sew felt that was comprised of up to 20 layers of wool fiber. So for those of you who are felt makers, that was very thick and very firm felt. So when I rang to make an appointment to go to the sewing machine shop that had been recommended by everybody that I asked, the man there, he was second or third generation working with machines and servicing them for commercial companies and domestic companies or domestic people. He said, bring the fabric with you, bring what you want to try. And I only wanted a straight stitch. So I ended up buying a Janome straight stitcher, and I have never, ever regretted it. So it only goes back or forwards. I don't have all sorts of different options, but I can do free embroidery, and I do everything with it. So bringing the fabric really, really makes sense. And
That's actually
that
what you mentioned. Sorry, yeah. No, something that you mentioned now made me think as well. So if you are maybe looking into the future, if you are looking at making quilts or doing embroidery on the machine, always go and look at that as well. So if you're on a budget, maybe starting with a lower end range, moving up, or if you can afford, invest in that machine that is for your future. But that is if you are serious about it. So
yeah, and Rita has just shared an excellent tip here in the comments. Rita is the most wonderful hand stitcher and, you know, sewer extraordinaire. And she's saying that some sewing machine shops also offer free lessons. That's really interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, if you buy a new machine, normally you can go for free lessons. And I always encourage people also, if you buy your machine, go for those lessons. Don't just think to use the manual or figure out yourself. Go for those lessons, because there's little things that you might not know, might not pick up from your manual or the guide that they will show you. And if you're getting stuck, they're there to help you.
That's very interesting. And then once you have your machine, then of course it's the next thing is selecting a needle. And maybe you might like to explain a little bit about why the needle makes such a difference to your project and which needles are suitable for which projects.
Oh yes, this is quite important, and I found that a lot of people don't actually understand that a needle can make a difference to the garment. So if you are, let's say, a little bit more advanced and you are sewing a satin or a silk, the fabric, how it's been woven together, if you're going to do it with a normal universal needle or a needle that is too thick, it will actually damage the fabric. So that's where we'll end up using a microtex needle that's more suitable for the thin, delicate fabrics. We have a jeans needle, or some places call it a denim needle, that is suitable for your thicker fabrics. So if you're thinking of your denim and things like that, we'll actually use a jeans needle. The sizing can go up to, if you actually look on the little chart, it normally says the name, it says the type of needle, the system, and then it will also give you little codes like a 12, a 10, or things like that. That is actually the sizing. So the size of a needle for like a jean needle can go up to 120, even 130. It's quite a big needle, where microtex can be up to, the smallest I have is 60. So you need different needles for the thickness of fabric. Your universal needle is quite good for your general type of sewing, for your cottons, linens, and so forth. Sizing wise is normally about an 80, 70, 80, 90 even, that we use in there. But then we have our jersey and our stretch. And these are very specialized for, as the name says, jersey. So this is for like your t-shirt fabric, so for your jersey. And then you have your stretch, that is for your super stretch fabrics, your spandex, your lycra type of fabrics. And their needle, if you look at the point there, they blunt, they round it. Because if you had to go and sew with any of the others through that fabric, you can actually create little holes and they will start running. And you're going to end up crying because your whole garment is spoiled because you used the wrong needle. So needles and the size of the needle is very, very important. So yeah.
And what is also interesting, when I went and I initially bought my machine, I discovered that actually, because in my head I was sewing felt and it was, you know, thick and heavy, I thought I would need a thick and heavy needle, but in fact I need a very fine needle for going through the felt successfully.
Yes.
So it is really interesting. Yes.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because it's how the felt has been, you know, bonded together with, when your fabric is woven, the thickness of the yarns, how they are a lot tighter. So that's basically why, the construction of the fabric.
Yeah. And it's only by experience, you know, when you start something new, often you think, you know, you'll work with what you have. don't maybe invest in extra needles, for example, for different projects. But once you start working with the correct needle, it makes everything so much simpler. It's like anything, you have to start with simple projects. So we had quite a few questions at the beginning, and some of those. So people were wondering, Arzelle, what are some simple beginner-friendly sewing projects that will help people build their confidence and their skills? If you could recommend some of those, what you would think, that would be great.
I always say start with little easy projects. You don't necessarily always need to start with a garment. Even if your end goal is to sew your own garments, you can start with little things like pouches, where you're putting in a zip. So you're building confidence into sewing a zip, how to do corners, tote bags, pillowcases. You can actually then go and make some interesting patchwork on them, so it can be a bit more creative. You have a little bit more practice into that. There's a lot of other like placemats you can make. So any type of project where you can do a lot of straight stitching, so you can get comfortable with your machine. And we want to move on to garments, easy type of tops, cardigan type of tops that won't maybe necessarily have a collar onto it, or like a lot of detail into it. A-line skirts, pencil skirts. So a bit more simplistic, but they build confidence so you can move on to the next later.
And I think that, excuse me, that phrase, building confidence, it's so important. And to understand when you start a new process, whether it's eco-printing, felting, or sewing, we all start at the beginning, and we can't expect to make our wedding dress before we've sewn our napkins.
Yes, exactly.
I'm just going to share a bag or a project. It's an origami bag, and this is a project that I would recommend within my own membership that people would sew at the beginning, because it's one simple rectangle of fabric which is folded in an interesting way, and it's got a handle. But when I made my first origami bag, I had looked at the instructions online for making this bag, and you may well laugh at this. Everything said the person said it will take about 20 minutes. And it's only a simple rectangle. 4.5 hours later, I was sweating and frustrated.
Yeah,
so
I've been there as well.
A lot.
I've had that as well. That's the thing with sewing. You cannot rush it. You cannot rush it, and to figure out the pattern, it's a lot more than just sewing that goes into it.
Yeah, and I think that origami bag, that's a free, that's a simple kind of tutorial that you can find on Pinterest. But actually, I did start with bags, and I think that when you have an independent pattern designer that writes the patterns very simply with clear instructions, even though the bag or whatever you make may appear complicated, if the instructions are written well, and I know you design your own patterns, that makes all the difference. I think once you know the process, it makes a really, really big difference. So once, people start on something simple, let's just say they start on a pouch like you have here, and there's the cutting the fabric, as you said, there's ironing at every stage of the process. In this case, there is a zip there. Can you suggest some projects for people with more experience? What do you what would be a good project for somebody with more experience?
It's quite an interesting one. So if you are into sewing your own garments, I would say look at your own closet. What are the type of things that you already have there? Maybe look into making something that has more pattern pieces. So maybe a jacket, a lined jacket, or a skirt with lining. So it is adding in that extra techniques, that little bit more advanced that you need to do. Maybe a different type of fabric that you can use. So where you start using silks, your satins that are more tricky to use, we have to use a French seam within them. So you can even, let's say you have like a special event coming up, you can always think of making like your own evening dress or cocktail dress or something like that has a bit more detail into it. I am now actually looking at, because I've made corsets and things for wedding dresses, but I'm quite curious to know how the historical corsets are being made. So that is a next level for me that I want to actually go and explore into.
That's really interesting. And I love the fact that a lot of your patterns, they're minimal or zero waste. You know, maybe you might like to say a little bit about these two.
Yeah. So these two here, actually, so the one on the left side, that is where I'm holding the phone. That is a absolute beginner's zero waste, not zero waste, it's minimal waste type of top, because it does have a hole cut out for the neck that can be used maybe for another craft project. But that is a square that has been wrapped in a certain way. I like, when I'm now designing and making patterns, I don't necessarily go and draft patterns anymore. I try to use my blocks. Let's say I buy a meter of fabric. I know a meter of fabric will be enough for this for me, depending on how wide it is. And then I start planning and plotting, because I know how a pattern should look. I would start planning like, okay, how can I actually space this out so that I can have minimal waste or minimal whatever is cut off from this. So both of these shirts are minimal waste. They are not zero waste. They are minimal waste. Very little pieces are cut off. So yeah, so even as a beginner, it's a bit more tricky to maybe do zero waste, because you need to understand patterns, but there are still pattern books, pattern designers that do create zero waste patterns that you can actually use. So that is actually the one on the left side where I was holding the phone. That is actually one of the ones that I teach. I'll talk about that later, but it's actually one of the ones that my members do in my course. The one on the left is just something I absolutely loved, and I wanted to test my skill to see how little could I actually waste or cut away when I was making that one. And it actually, if you go look on my Instagram, I shared it there. I share all of these sort of things. I share it there and show you exactly this is the amount of waste that is cut off. So yeah, I just love the idea of trying to use the whole piece of fabric.
Yeah, and I particularly love that. That one on the left with the wrap around the waist. Now,
Yeah.
the fact that you're very beautiful and slim, I mean, I won't say it helps. It looks gorgeous on you, Arzelle. It's really lovely.
Thank you. Thank you.
And for eco printers, quite a few eco printers, we actually work with vintage Japanese kimono silk. And that always comes in 32 centimeter wide, you know, pieces with the selvage on each end. So as a new sewist, I found that Japanese sewing books, there are books available that are for remaking kimono fabric. So like this top that I'm actually wearing, I think I might have a photo of it. Yeah, here we go. So this was actually a top that I made from kimono silk in a cream color, and I wore it for about a year as cream, and then I printed it afterwards. But those Japanese books, they also, that whole epic is using it's trying to use every bit of the fabric. So there's almost nothing wasted. Yeah,
exactly. And especially if you're using something like a silk, it's normally quite more expensive. So you don't really want to waste either.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And you know, talking about you designing your own pieces, you know, have you got you know, what inspires you, and how are you motivated to create new designs and projects? Is it for yourself or for other people, or how do you get inspired?
Okay, so at this moment, I don't design for other people anymore. It's basically for myself. And I'm currently building up my wardrobe, trying to minimize the amount of shopping I do. So I buy very seldom. But I am looking at what I have within my wardrobe, looking at the colors, patterns, and things that I like. And I try to base what I then make around that. So I would definitely say a lot of my inspiration I actually get from the fabric that I use or the fabric that I buy. If I do sometimes get a little bit of a like, oh, I don't have any creativity or anything happening, I do like to surround myself with creative people or art exhibitions. So I draw my energy from around my surroundings. Sometimes the piece of fabric itself just speaks to me, and I would like, okay, this can be brilliant. Exactly that one. This is, I take that piece and I open it up, it's basically a big rectangle that I have draped onto the mannequin. And the fabric, when I saw it in the shop, it just spoke to me. And I'm like, I need to make a big piece, something where you can see this beautiful print, not cut into it, because I didn't want to ruin the beautiful koi fishes onto it. So this one is definitely a clear example of being inspired by the fabric and letting the fabric actually drive what I make out of it. So I've got a mannequin, using the mannequin, draping and pinning, and then starting to adjust, doing some hand stitches, pinning it on myself, seeing how it looks. It's a whole process and it takes some time, but it's so rewarding to actually, what I had in my head, start realizing it there on the actual fabric.
Yeah, it looks beautiful, and that skirt is draping beautifully. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you.
What is that fabric? What is that made from?
It's just I think it's a bit of a quilter's cotton.
Yeah,
Very,
very interesting. Yeah, and something that a lot of my friends, peers, followers are interested in is also it's upcycling. And as eco printers, particularly not just for beginners, but for everybody, we do a lot of sampling because the vegetation that we use, the leaves, the bark, or the onion skins, they can give different prints at different times of the year, and also depending on where you live, very, very different. So we do get we have a lot of samples. We're passionate about upcycling garments. But sometimes you'll find something that needs to be cut up and repurposed, and sewing is a great way of doing that, or using your samples. Have you got any tips or any projects that you like using upcycled fabrics for?
I do at times like using that. Sometimes if it's not too big pieces, I would incorporate them into maybe like if I have a coat or something that they're, let's say, classical, starting at the elbow, starting to worn out a little bit. I would use those as patches, as interesting details. I'll add them in for visible mending. I would even sometimes, if I have like different garments, maybe certain parts are worn out, I like to combine them into interesting ways. And let's say it's pieces of fabric that I have, even like something like a patchwork jacket. So if it's maybe type of wools or things, creating a patchwork and maybe doing a quilt, basically. Quilt, putting them together into an interesting way, using my pattern already so that I can plan out and plot out exactly where I want to place them. So there's a lot of different ways that I actually like doing it and incorporating it into. Sometimes I actually like thrifting and just doing something different by adding a pattern embroidery. So just by uplifting a piece, not necessarily cutting it apart. Other times, maybe a pants that I really adore, but adding in another, let's say a jean, adding in another jean to actually make it into a skirt. So thinking of what I would wear and then seeing what I have and how I can combine them together. It doesn't always come immediately. Sometimes it takes a bit of time. Sometimes the thing needs to hang there for a while so I can actually look at it and like get inspiration for it. But yeah, those different ways I would definitely normally do.
And I love the fact that you said it doesn't come immediately, because really we're talking about, slow fashion, slow sewing, being mindful about what we use and how we use fabric. And something I love doing, I just have an example here. I did a sort of a sew and show for a New Zealand company recently, and it was a large bag. And what I like doing is just incorporating, say, samples of naturally dyed fabric and all sorts of different things and remnants of fabric into the one piece. So bags are great for doing that. And if I just flick back, this was my first bag that I made. And the image on the right there is just looking into it. So it's not going to be so easy to see, but things like the inner pockets in that, they were an eco-printed silk noil. And I just reused backpack straps from a Mad Packs bag that I had. So rather than making new straps, I reused straps for a backpack that particular bag had holes in it after about 5 years of use. So it's really great to be able to upcycle things, and to incorporate them into into the projects. So I'm just going to throw it out there. If anybody has a question that they would like Arzelle to answer. There may be no questions, Arzelle, and I'm going to ask you now in a minute for your top pro tips for successful results, particularly for new people. But if you have a question for Arzelle, please put 3 comments in front, 3 after, and ask it here on YouTube as a question, and I will be able to identify it, find it, and give it to Arzelle. So Arzelle, while I'm waiting to see if people have any questions, could you share a couple of your pro tips for successful results? What are the essential things new sewists need to remember, please?
Okay, I think starting off, when you're buying your fabric, you need to know what fabric, your skill level with fabric and pattern, they should match together. So I know we want to like buy beautiful fabric, but keep in mind, if the fabric is maybe going to be too tricky, you might be overwhelmed. So stick to a fabric that will match with what you can do. When you have that fabric, very important is to actually pre-wash it. So you need to pre-wash fabric, and especially when it's natural fibers, you need to wash it, not only to get rid of like any type of dirt or thing that's on there or chemicals that are on there. Your natural fibers shrink, and you definitely don't want to be making your garment, sewing the whole beautiful piece, washing it the first time, and it shrinks. You definitely don't want that. So pre-wash it. Then after every seam that you've actually sewn, iron or press. That is so important. Don't just leave everything for the end. After every seam, iron, press your piece beautiful, because it will just elevate your garment it will just put it into the next level. It takes it from looking like a $10 garment to $100,000 type of garment. So please do that. And I would say, what else? Enjoy the process. It takes time. It's not going to happen quickly. You are going to make mistakes. You are going to unpick. We all do. I often do still. So things the wrong way around. We're going to unpick, but enjoy the process. Don't rush it. That's the whole reason why it's called slow fashion. We are there to enjoy the process. We are there to actually, it's not just about creating, you're expressing yourself. You are growing awareness and appreciation for the actual task that goes into making a garment. So next time you're going into the shop, you'll be like, oh, wow, look how amazing this is done. I understand now why the price is like this, or all those type of things. And it's also, I find it for myself, when I've had a stressful day, just to go sit behind my machine and sew, it actually relaxes me. So, so enjoy the process.
Yeah, I'm laughing because when I started sewing, I bought, my machine was expensive, when I got it, because I wanted it for a very specific task.
Yes.
And I hadn't used it for about 6 years, and I'd only used it about 7 times. I sold every exhibition piece except one. So it was, it was an investment in the machine, but it
Yes.
certainly did its duty. And then I decided I needed to get to grips with it again. And I either needed to use it or sell it, because it cost over €1,000 many years ago. So when I decided, the first thing I sewed was, it was actually silk, and it was with a Japanese pattern, and I did French seams. I knew nothing. I just had to look online. But I never thought the day would come when I would also find sewing relaxing. What I find exceptionally stressful is cutting out pattern pieces and all that aspect, but the actual sewing and even the ironing I enjoy.
Yes.
And you have a lovely little thing here, for stash busting with very small bits of fabric. And maybe you might just like to explain what you're doing here.
Yeah, so I struggle throwing away fabrics or any thread, so I keep most of it. I've got little boxes. I've got a box for bigger pieces and a box for smaller pieces. And sometimes when I'm just a little bit stressed, I will go to my machine. I will take some of these pieces and I will just start sewing them on. And my machine's got quite a few decorative stitches. I will just start sewing them on with the decorative stitches, and then do some like free motion. The tree is actually free motion embroidery that I did just to relax. So these I would sometimes use to actually frame, or even as like for gift cards or anything like that. So I'm just using what I have as waste to repurpose it in other creative ways, but also for myself to sit and relax while I'm doing that. So it's a mindfulness and it's a creative at the same time, and sustainable, trying to use everything that I have.
Yeah, I really love that. So thank you so much for that tip. And I think, Arzelle, there aren't actually any questions. And I know that we had quite a lot beforehand and we seem to have covered them. So I would just like to say to everybody again, in a minute, I'm going to ask Arzelle how you can work with her or more closely if you would like to. But remember, for those of you who've joined late or are watching this as a recording, Arzelle is offering a free fabric guide, which is really cool because it has information of about 60 different fabric types. And after this live stream ends, I'm going to put the link in the video description below. So make sure that you check that out afterwards. And Arzelle, if people want to work with you as well, more closely, what sort of things do you offer online?
So online, okay, so of course there's my Instagram where I share a lot of tips, but online I have a course that will actually soon turn into a membership. So it's absolute beginners, fundamental sewing. It is about learning about your fabrics, learning about why do you actually even have different types of pins? Why does it really matter? Going into needles, interfacing, ironing techniques, getting to know your iron. So all these things that are normally quite overwhelming when you're starting off, and you maybe get frustrated because you can't understand why things are not working or turning out how you wish they would. I cover a lot of that, and I talk about the importance of having the right tools to actually assist and guide you in making the process smoother and even sometimes quicker by having the right tools. So this all happens on my course, my membership. We are opening our doors again end of July. So end of July, opening the doors, taking a new intake August.
That's fantastic, Arzelle. Thank you so much, because I do think there are going to be people who will definitely want to work with you. So I'm glad that you have something that they can actually keep their eyes open for. And thank you so much for the freebie that you are offering people. I think it's fantastic, and I'm looking forward to delving into it myself. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And for those of you who may not know one or the other of us, Arzelle and I met. We're both in another membership ourselves, where we are actually learning about developing our own businesses. So it's great to meet somebody with really similar ethics and values. So it's been a pleasure, Arzelle. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nicola. It's been really fantastic talking to you as well and sharing all these tips and things. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So if anybody has a question for either of us and they are watching the recording, please leave the question as a comment, and we will try and get back to you as soon as we see it and as soon as we can. So thank you all very much. And there's one question who's just come in. Okay, so this is a question. What type of mannequin would you recommend? And I'm assuming that this is a mannequin from the perspective of sewing and sizing, as opposed to a mannequin for display. So maybe you might like to answer that.
Yeah, definitely. So mannequins, you get a lot of different type of mannequins. Of course, you get ones that are just for your visual displays. If you're getting one for sewing, you actually get brands that are very set in the measurements already. So if you know your measurements, you can see if you find one that actually has the set measurements. Some of them they have padding. So I know for myself, my hips are 2 sizes bigger than my top. So I have to add on padding normally if I buy a mannequin that fits my top. The essential thing with that mannequin, why I chose it, is because I can pin into the mannequin. So I can pin straight into the mannequin. That is one thing I would definitely say look out for. You do find adjustable mannequins as well. I do find them sometimes to be a little bit more flimsy, especially if you're going to be adjusting the whole time. So if you're adjusting for different sizes, might not be the best, but if it's just for your size, that will be brilliant to use as well. Look at your budget. There are different ranges, but avoid ones that are for visual display and that you can't put the pin well into it. Okay, your pins need to be able to stay quite good into it. Yeah.
Okay, that's a great tip. And in fact, I have a mannequin that, you know, one of the adjustable ones. I was doing a swap with somebody for something, and actually it is very handy, but it is very flimsy. So in fact, I've never used it to size anything. I have used it to hang things on, but not to size them. So I like the fact that you're suggesting one that you could pin into, because that would be really helpful.
I used to have various sizes when I used to make for people. I would have different sizes and they would stay within that size so that I don't need to go and adjust the whole time and wear it out. So yeah.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So we've had some lovely comments. People have really enjoyed what you've been sharing, Arzelle. It's been a pleasure for me to learn more as well. And thank you so much. So again, Arzelle has a freebie. Let me just go back here, and we will drop the link for this into the video description. So for those of you on the replay, you can get this afterwards. Thank you all so much, and I look forward to seeing you for the next live stream that I have. So if you've enjoyed this, maybe you might consider following the channel. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.